Welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us another week. We have a great show planned for you this week. My guest is going to be Jim Rooney. Most people here in the region are very familiar with the Rooney family. They've been owners of the Steelers for decades. He'll share with us some of the stories about growing up around the Steelers, how the Steelers came to be world champions 6 times, and also a little about what he does today and speaking to businesses about changing their culture. But first, we'll start off with our usual features, and we'll start with the Community Champion of the Week. And this week, that is J.T. McCamick. He is being honored this week by Youth Services Systems with the Good Samaritan Award in recognition of his work to help impoverished members of the community. And Youth Services is a very special organization that does so much to help so many people here in this area. And for them to recognize Mr. McCamick with this award certainly shows the type of effort that he's put forth into helping people that are less fortunate here in this area. So we recognize him as the Community Champion this week on the Jamie Bordas Show. Next up, Quote of the Week. And, I typically look to somebody that said something, maybe somebody in literature, sports figure, but this week a little bit different. This is something that was written by a number of people, and it comes right from the Declaration of Independence. And that is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Of course, right from the Declaration of Independence. And I chose that this week because as we look around our country, we see so much hate going on right now. We see so much division. We see so much fighting going on. And I think that we do need to remember that all men are created equal. That's something that's been a part of our country since it was founded. That's something that our founders thought was so important that it was right there at the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. And we see this division, and it's so difficult to watch, so difficult to see, and we've got to look for ways to come together. And maybe a good way to start is looking back and reading the Declaration of Independence, seeing what those words said, seeing what they mean, thinking about what they mean. And I came today from the YMCA Light of the Valley luncheon where we presented the Patron of Youth Award to Dr. Jan Joseph. And to see people like him that are doing good things in this community, trying to help children, and to see what the YMCA does to try to be as Dr. Lee Jones himself had said, who's the Patron of Youth Award is named after, the YMCA is a good place for all of God's children. And we need to think about that, about what we're doing for our children, what example are we setting for our children, and that all of them are created equal. And if you go to the YMCA, you see young people, old people, male, female, black, white, and everybody's together, exercising, enjoying the sports programs, working out. And if we could just look at each individual as the person next to us and whatever we may do as a friend, as a fellow American citizen, I think the world could be such a better place. So that's why I chose that this week as the quote of the week, and I hope that everybody will maybe take a moment to, get online, read the Declaration of Independence, get out a book and read it, and think about what those words mean. Next up, a legal tip. This ties into Mr. Rooney being our guest this week, perhaps, and that is that you can't sell sports team apparel without having a license, and it's very important. One of the things that it's a business, whether it be the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, those teams are putting efforts into their product, their teams, and one of the things they have is the right to market those teams, the right to sell apparel, the right to sell, whether it be jerseys, whether it be some other type of sports paraphernalia. And you can't just go and print up shirts that say the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Pittsburgh Pirates or whatever it is and go sell them without getting a license that's appropriate under the law. Otherwise, you are taking something that's owned by those teams, those organizations, and making a profit off of it, and it's not appropriate. And you may think, well, I'm just doing this as a little side thing here. Well, if everybody was doing it as a little side thing, they would no longer own those rights and be able to benefit from the rights and the things that they do to market the teams and to be able to put the time and effort and money into doing that. So make sure that you remember that. It's against the law. You can't do it without getting a license, without having permission to do that. So it's important to those organizations, like it would be for any business, that when you put your money and your time into your business, you don't want others taking advantage of it. So keep that in mind, and that's our legal tip here this week on the Jamie Bordas Show. We need to take a break. When we come back from commercial, I'll have with me my guest this week, Mr. Jim Rooney. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show.
Don't forget to do your homework.
All right, Mom. Trick or treat.
Here you go. Happy Halloween.
For your home, for your life, for more than 50 years. DeNoon Lumber.
Disasters happen. Pick the team that takes care of them all. Powered by offices in Wheeling, Morgantown, and Pittsburgh, Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration is ready to handle any size emergency at a moment's notice. We have the right people, knowledge, and equipment to respond 24 hours a day.
I'm Dana Hogerson. When disaster strikes your home or business, tell your insurance provider you prefer the restoration company the Mountaineers call, Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration.
Welcome back to the show. Always appreciate you being here, and this is my favorite time each week when I have a guest with me, and this week I'm really excited because he's down here all the way from Pittsburgh. Jim Rooney, who is the grandson of Steelers founder Art Rooney, son of the late Dan Rooney, who was not only affiliated with the Steelers for years but also the U.S. ambassador to Ireland, and now he's carrying on the family tradition of telling stories about the Steelers and going out into businesses and talking about the Steelers culture and helping them to bring about change in their businesses and bring about a good culture in their businesses. Jim, thanks for being with me here this week.
Jamie, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
And of course, you're in town because you were the guest speaker today for the YMCA Light of the Valley luncheon. It was great to have you here in town for that event.
Well, it was a wonderful event. It was a real privilege to get to speak, to get to hear you and you know, what you're doing in the community, then especially Dan Joseph and he and his wife, what a commitment they make to this community. Wonderful people.
They really do, and he was really a very deserving recipient of the award, and it was really a pleasure to be on the stage and be one of the individuals to present that award to him. So, you know, you grew up around the Steelers, something I think a lot of people think would be awesome to get to do. You know, the Wheeling area and the Ohio Valley here in general is a huge Steelers area. Now, you get a few Browns fans on the Ohio side of the river. We don't talk about that too much, but you know, big Steelers area here. So people are black and gold.
Well, as you know, my grandfather actually played semi-pro baseball down here in Wheeling in the teens and 20s with a team called the Wheeling Stogies. He and his brother Dan Rooney, not my father, but his brother Dan Rooney, were down here, I think, 5 or 6 years, and they barnstormed all over the country with jerseys that said Wheeling. But ever since that time, you know, Wheeling has been, you know, part of our home. My grandfather used to always say, you know, Pittsburghers from Erie to Morgantown and from Wheeling over to Johnstown. So he definitely considered this Steeler territory, and it's great the times I've been down here in the deep fall when, you know, you see black and gold everywhere, and everyone is excited about the team, and hopefully they will feel really good about us this year all the way until February.
You were telling me earlier about how your family would even come down here to Oglebay and spend some time back in the day.
Right. So I grew up, I remember I was very young, 4, 5, 6 years old, and my grandfather brought us all down here on an outing. I know that he brought my father and my mother when they were younger in the 50s here often, so he never forgot the fun he had in Wheeling and what a beautiful place this was, and so it's a fond memory being down at Oglebay. Oglebay
is certainly one of our treasures. I mean, you know, even living here in town, I enjoy going up there and you know, around New Year's, I always go up there and spend time in one of the cottages up there with family and friends, and it really is a special place here in our community. So, you know, what are some of the things that you know? First of all, you know, your grandfather started the Steelers, and back then, you know, the NFL isn't today's NFL. I mean, it wasn't, you know, the high dollars and all the things we think about now that come with the NFL.
Right. So, you know, there's a million stories I can tell you that I've heard over those years. I think one fun story is one time, you know, now the whole team is on a plane and they go point to point and they're on buses and you know, get right to the hotel and then the stadium, and then everything is very well organized in sort of this big operation, which is great, and our players deserve that. But back, he tells a story about they were taking the train to a game in California, and I don't even think it was an NFL team they were playing, and they didn't have enough money to pay for everyone. So 2 of my uncles and 2 of the trainers that weren't essential, they weren't the main trainers, had to get off the train and stay at a friend of my grandfather's in Oklahoma City. They went and played the game, and then he had enough money to pay for their tickets to come back. So that's what the Steelers, that's the story I heard, and that's what the Steelers were like in the olden days. The good thing that he would always talk about those days, those train rides in particular, you know, you would get to spend hours and hours with the guys, and we certainly myself, my brother, my father especially have good relationships with these players, but he really had that special connection, one, because he was an athlete, he was a great boxer and baseball player, but two, because you got to spend, real significant amount of time with these folks and build those types of relationships. And that was probably the thing he was most fond of getting to travel with the team and getting to build those relationships.
You talked earlier today at the luncheon about how your grandfather actually came to own the team, and it was actually kind of on a payback, so to speak.
Right. So he had a brother named Jim Rooney, and Jim had a semi-pro team, and as the story goes, there were blue laws in Pennsylvania. You couldn't work on Sundays, and they repealed the blue laws, and he had a friend who owned the Chicago Cardinals, and he called him up and said, Art, we're going to put a team in Philadelphia. Would you like to put one in Pittsburgh? And so Art went to his brother Jim and said, Jim, if you give me that team, I'll call this debt even. It was pretty significant debt. And Uncle Jim said, Art, that wouldn't be fair. That National Football League's never going to make it. I couldn't do that to you. But eventually he convinced him to give him the team, and my grandfather put them into the National Football League, and here we are today.
Yeah, the team struggled in some of those early years, and finally kind of broke through in the 70s, and with Chuck Noll being hired as coach, with your dad Dan Rooney kind of starting to run the team at that point, and it really became the Steelers as we know them today.
Right. My grandfather was a great sportsman, boxing, baseball, horse racing, but my father was a businessman, and he was really organized and had a plan for the Steelers, and he brought Chuck Noll in, and Chuck was so important to the Steelers. Chuck Noll took us from losers to winners. And he brought us, this commitment to the basics by being fundamental, by saying, look, our goal is to win the Super Bowl championship. And then he brought Joe Green in as his number one pick. And Joe was just probably the best leader I've ever seen on any sports team. Guys knew he had their back. When Joe would get interviewed after the game, he would talk about John Kolb and Moon Mullins and Sam Davis. He didn't talk about himself. He just had this tremendous commitment to the hard work that he saw all these guys doing all week long. And so Chuck sort of set that vision out, had that commitment to the basics. Joe sort of created that spiritual presence, that family presence you hear about. And my father was sort of the big picture guy and understood if we're going to do this, we have to be organized, we have to do things well. But he also always had that commitment to doing the right thing. And that was important to my father and important to having the people around the organization that had that same commitment.
It's interesting how a guy like Joe Green, with the nickname Mean Joe, is the guy that really could build relationships and things like that. You see that so often in life. The guys that are the really tough guys that when it comes to their opponent, when it comes to a teammate or somebody on the same organization, they're the ones that can really bring everybody together. Yeah.
So Joe it's interesting because Joe will talk about his early days himself and probably beats up on himself too much about the things he did that were a little bit out of hand and earned him that nickname Mean Joe. But as he grew and I spoke to him the other day actually, and he is just so observant, and he would watch what was going on with people, and he understood if a guy like Terry Bradshaw was down, that he would go sit with him and talk to him. He just had that fundamental leadership quality of relating, engaging, appreciating what folks were doing, and he was always observant of everything that was going on, what Chuck wanted and making sure that what Chuck wanted was getting done, but also being able to connect to each of those guys. And just as I said, we've had a ton of great leaders, and I could talk about all of them, and Joe would talk about all of them, but I don't know that there's anyone that's ever been better than Joe.
We need to take a break. When we come back, I'll continue speaking with Jim Rooney. We'll maybe even see if we can get a prediction out of him for this year's Steelers. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show. Welcome back to the show. I've been speaking with my guest this week, Jim Rooney, and we've been talking a little bit about the history of the Steelers and the Chuck Noll, Joe Green era. But let's maybe move ahead a little bit, Jim, to today's Steelers. And the Chuck Noll era turned into the Bill Cowher era, and has now turned into the Mike Tomlin era. And one of the things you see with the Steelers is that continuity, where you see, there's not changes of coaches every 2-3 years. There's those long tenures that provide that continuity. And one of the things you see Mike Tomlin say all of the time now is the standard is the standard, and he believes that, and you can tell it when he says it.
Right. Well, Mike is a special coach, and I think among the many things he does well is creating that standard, but also, or at least stewarding that standard that Chuck started with, and Bill did such a great job. Mike is a great steward of it, but he also communicates extremely well with a new generation of players, and we all know this generation, the distractions they have, and all the different mechanisms that they can go online and communicate. And but Mike really does a fantastic job, I think, of communicating with them. I think organizationally now my brother Art is the president, and Art doesn't have the same personality as my father and my grandfather, but his leadership and his moral compass, his principles, what he's dedicated to, are the exact same. And I think along with Kevin Colbert, our general manager, you have three people there that I think are putting the best team in the league together. And I'm proud, obviously, because I'm related and I grew up there. But being around sports organizations, et cetera, all my life, I'm excited to see what they've got together. I think our defense is going to be a lot better than it's going to continue to improve, and clearly we have one of the best offenses in football. So those three guys really deserve a tremendous amount of credit, and Mike is leading the charge, and I'm proud and excited about that.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I went up to training camp last week. First time I've ever been up. I talked about it a little bit on last week's show, and one of the things I noticed was that the defense was moving. I mean, they were getting around, and you could see a little bit of that speed there on defense and some of that youth, and how that's going to, I think, serve the team well going forward, including this year.
Well, absolutely. My brother said at the end of the season, he doesn't make a whole lot of football comments, but he makes some very important ones, and he said, we got to rush the passer a little bit better, and we went out and drafted T.J. Watt, and we saw in that first preseason game, TJ looked phenomenal. So from Art to Kevin and drafting him to Mike and Joey Porter and all the guys, Keith Butler, putting this together, I'm really excited to see where we're at. So hopefully things go together, folks stay healthy, which you can never control, and I think there's potential for a really special season this year.
One of the other things I noticed, you talked about how Coach Tomlin really has a knack for relating to today's players, and up there at training camp last week, I mean, AB was being AB. I mean, he was, dancing around and talking with the crowd a little bit, and but he lets him be himself and lets him stretch that. I mean, as far as you can go with that before he has to rein it back in. You can tell, there are times where it's got to be reined back in, but he lets them be themselves and understands that there's going to be some Twitter activity, there's going to be some social media stuff going on, but they have to know the boundaries and when it's going too far.
Well, look, and guys are going to make mistakes. I don't think any of us know exactly what to do in this new world with the communication tools. So you're going to have some mistakes, but I think it started with Chuck, that Chuck treated our players like men. He expected them to be adults, and if they couldn't act like an adult, they weren't part of the team, but he expected you to act like an adult. He was tolerant of some mistakes, and you look at Bill Cowher, now you look at Mike, and I think there is that appreciation that they're not in college anymore. You have to treat them like men, and if you do that, they're going to respond that much better. And yes, there's a point where you just can't tolerate certain mistakes, but if you treat people like adults, they come to your organization with the type of commitment that you need in a work environment. And I think that's something that all three of those men have done well.
That's something actually that you, through your business now, are taking out to others. That what you've learned from that Steelers culture, now going out through consulting and talking about culture in businesses, change in businesses to help businesses try to succeed and thrive the way the Steelers have.
Right. I probably learned as much in business from my father as anyone could have. I spoke to him on the phone every night of my life. I went away to high school and college, and we talked regularly. I was spent a tremendous amount of time with him. And one thing that was always important to him were partners, and you and your father have been tremendous partners to us, and I want to thank you for what you're doing with us as business partners, but also what you're doing with the Ronald McDonald House, and that for every sack we get, you guys are giving $500 to the Ronald McDonald House. We got a lot of good defensive linemen this year, so you might be writing some pretty big checks, but that was one of the things I learned from my father, was that it's, there's a partnership, that it's always a community, that there's no one person, and that culture is so important, and it's how you do things, your approach, and then how you bring a team on board. So I've had, it's been part of my life for about the last year and a half, and I got to talk to my father while he was still with us about what I'm doing, and it's a privilege to use his wisdom, to use some of his examples, and get to talk about the Steelers, but also sort of help folks look at, are there things they're doing that might be similar to the Steelers, or are there things that there might be some gaps that they could improve. And then I learn a lot, and we'll come back, and sometimes I'll give my brother 2 cents and say, this is something I really learned, and he's a smart guy, so if it's a good idea, he'll listen to it. But it's a real privilege for me to sort of use what my father has taught me to try and help other folks in businesses and organizations.
All right, so let's see if we can get a prediction. Super Bowl 52 next February in Minnesota, of all places. The Steelers have played in some cold weather Super Bowl cities. I mean, Detroit, indoors, of course, but nonetheless, what's this year going to be like for the Steelers?
Well, look, we certainly have the horses, so I feel really good about us. I feel really good, as I said, about my brother's leadership this year, about Kevin Colbert, about Mike. That team is a special team, so hopefully we'll all be cold this February and we'll be up in Minnesota.
I'm going to stick. I haven't done this yet this year. I always make a prediction before the year starts. I'm going to go ahead and do it now since I have you here with me. I'm going to make the same prediction I did last year, believe it or not, on this show, which is Steelers over Packers in the Super Bowl will be my prediction. I'm going to go Steelers over Packers in Super Bowl 52. So I'm going to throw it out there now in August.
I hope you're right, Jamie. I hope you're right.
Hey, Jim, thanks so much for being here today on the show, and thanks for coming down to Wheeling for the YMCA of the Valley.
It's been great to be here today. I appreciate it.
We need to take a break. When we come back, we'll wrap up the show with some sports. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show.
Tractor-trailers are some of the most dangerous vehicles on the road. There are federal rules for load sizes, driver's hours, and maintenance for a reason. When big rigs don't follow these rules, entire families can be torn apart. We have the talent and the resources to take on these large companies. Hopefully, through our work, families are being helped and trucking companies are getting the message about safety. Bordas and Bordas, fighting for justice.
Welcome back to the show. It's time to talk sports, and let's start off kind of where we ended the last segment, which was with the Steelers. And the big news kind of out of the first preseason game was T.J. Watt. I mean, getting a couple of sacks and looking like a veteran, even though was a rookie in his first NFL preseason game. But really exciting to see a high draft pick looking like it could pay off. That was just one preseason game. We'll see what happens through the rest of them, but a great start for T.J. Watt that could really help a defense there that needs some youth. And, Joey Porter even talking that he may be the starter over James Harrison, and that James Harrison maybe uses some sort of type of relief pitcher. That's a heck of a relief pitcher to have James Harrison coming in. But nonetheless, T.J. Watt looking very impressive. Sticking with Pittsburgh sports, the Pirates just seems like every single time they get back to 500, they drop a couple games and go right back down, and that was the case again here in this past week. I mean, they have a little run, they get back up there, and then all of a sudden a losing streak, and they're back down. So the question remains, what can they do here on the closing stretch? And all year I've been saying, they're hanging around not necessarily because they're playing well, but because nobody's playing that great in the National League Central. And It looks like the Cubs are, they're out in front now, but the Cards are hanging around, the Brewers are hanging around, but it's going to be whoever is hot in September in all likelihood with the way things are going, unless someone can really separate themselves quickly here. But it looks like it's going to come down to who's hot in September. So hopefully that can be the Pirates. Hopefully they can get the bats going and get the arms going at the same time. Speaking of, football has been the theme of today's show, but the Mountaineers are only a couple weeks away from opening up now and going to be opening, of course, on a Sunday night against Virginia Tech in Washington, D.C., and I'm really looking forward to that game. A lot of times in the openers you're against a team that maybe a Division I AA or something like that, or maybe a non-Power 5 conference team. But to get Virginia Tech, an old rival, right out of the gate, I'm excited to see what the Mountaineers can do, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Greer, the new quarterback for the Mountaineers. I think he's going to be fantastic. Very accurate arm, strong arm, was 5-0 as a starter down at Florida when he was still there, so I'm looking forward to seeing him play. And don't forget, high school football starts up next week. We're just around the corner now. Teams are in the middle of their scrimmages, seeing what players can do. You have some idea from the year before, but really seeing how it all gels together. And I always think that big leap is from a player's sophomore to junior year. That's when I'm most excited to see a player's, how they transition from that sophomore to junior year. They usually put on more muscle, a little bit more maturity, and that's when I always look forward to seeing what the juniors can do. You kind of know by the time a kid's a senior what he's going to do, but what are those juniors going to do plays a big factor in how your team is going to be in any given year. That's all the time we have this week. Really appreciate you being with us. Next week we'll spend maybe a little bit more time on high school football and talking about what the year ahead may bring. Look forward to seeing you then. We'll see you next time on the Jamie Bordas Show.